Looks like we're at about capacity. So welcome back, everybody. And we are now ready to start our fifth session. And this is a CEU accredited panel discussion. And I am really excited to, first of all, tell you that you need to attend the entire webinar to receive credit for this. And obviously, as always, if you have any questions, please contact us at ceu@iida.org, and we'll help you with getting that processed. But let's jump right in. I'm so honored to be in conversation this morning with Kari Pei, who is the Vice President of Product Design with Interface. And Kari is there in LaGrange, Georgia, and I'm here in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And so in between our geography, I'm really excited, Kari, to chat with you this afternoon, about a number of things, your career trajectory, your purpose, your passion. So let's jump right in. Has been so deeply connected to sustainability, and you've had one of those wonderfully rare lives thus far where personal, professional, and process have all connected for you. Can you talk a little bit about, particularly for this audience, many of whom are students and young designers at the beginning of their career. Can you talk a little bit about your personal journey? I'd love for you to share that.
Oh yeah, thank you. First, thank you for having me here and having this opportunity to connect with, our future talent and the people that are going to be driving the aesthetics of our country, if not the world. And so this is really a thrill. But to speak about how all this all came together with my personal life, my professional life, and then also just my goals. It's really I'm really lucky to be able to wake up every single day and to do what I'm doing and have this continuity throughout everything. So I grew up in Nebraska, one of 6 kids, single mom, running around outside all the time. And my family is very much involved in forestry and floristry, and I always had a connection to the outdoors and to plants, and so I went to University of Michigan to study art and thought that I wanted to be a fine artist. But when I moved to New York after college, I got a job working as a weaver. And from that moment on, everything was just completely connected. From that job working as a weaver, I started working for Jane Barnes. This is early on, and this is back in the, I hate to say it, the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And she sent me to Japan. I was really lucky. She sent me to Japan to teach these French weaving programs to the Japanese mills. And that's where I first was introduced to so many ideas about materiality and so many ideas about the connection between nature and materiality that always just stayed with me. And then, as I got into this industry and I moved away from art and moved into manufacturing, I started thinking, there's so many things in this world already. What can I do to have any kind of impact or positive impact? And so I decided very early on, and I think it was through that experience of going to Japan, that whatever I do has to be with purpose. And there has to be a raison d'etre for that product to be in the world. And then I have to be ultimately responsible for its existence, its life, while it's behaving as an object in the world, and then its life when it's finished behaving as an object.
Yeah.
And so then I went to Maharam, got into upholstery, worked with mills all over the world, and then with Gordon, and then my own studio. So it's been a consistent thread. It's been wonderful.
So no matter how we get there, right, we kind of all end up where we're supposed to be. I believe that's particularly true with creatives. And now you're at Interface, and it seems like so much of who you are and where you've been and what you've done tie in so nicely into your position as Vice President of Product of Design at Interface. Can you talk a little bit about what's a day in the life of Kari Pei at Interface, and what kinds of things do you get yourself in the middle of, and what kinds of things have you brought to market?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, Interface called me 5 years ago, and they were looking specifically for somebody who wasn't a carpet designer, because I'm a textile designer for commercial. I've done everything for all surfaces, the walls, the upholstery, the curtains, and I've done some carpeting before Interface called, but I'm not a carpet designer. They wanted somebody to come in with fresh eyes. So what that meant is building a team. They didn't have an interior team. They had a consultant that they've been working with for 25 years, the great David Oki. But it meant building a team. It meant creating new relationships between an internal design team and product development and marketing and sales. It meant connecting to the customers in a completely different way. So a day in the life is pretty varied, because just before this call, I was out on the factory floor looking at new product that we're developing for the carbon negative construction that we'll be talking about a little bit later. It's looking at yarns, it's creating new yarns, it's creating, so we're bringing in new machines too. So it's a bit of engineering, it's a bit of art, it's a bit of science, and taking those aspects of the job and then packaging them all up neatly into a product that is a result of having conversations with the customers, with the interior designers and the specifiers. It's an incredible job. I'm super lucky because it is so varied.
And I think back in in our tech room, we're trying to get some images up right now, but as we're working on that, the collection Embodied Beauty, which we're going to see, there we go, there are images right now. Can you talk a little bit about this connection? We know that you mentioned carbon negative, but we also know, you mentioned Japan being very pivotal in your early career, and this collection has a cultural connection for you as well. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yes, absolutely. So when we received the brief about 18 months ago or longer, the brief said that we had to create a carbon negative product. And this was really pretty surprising because we didn't have the machine to do it. We didn't have the construction to do it. We didn't have the yarn to do it. But we somehow had to work with these unknowns and create it. And what I find interesting about this idea is that when, going back a little bit, when Interface did call me, I'm a New Yorker. My whole career's been in New York. My family's in New York. My husband said, you have to take this job because it is the culmination of your whole career, your whole purpose, which was to think of the environment as we're creating products for commercial interiors and to put the environment first in many ways. Interface does that. And despite not having the machine or the yarn or the construction, Interface was very determined to start this, manufacturing revolution with defining products by carbon footprint and embodied carbon. And so, tying Japan to embodied beauty was pretty easy because when I was in Japan, yes, I learned this word ikigai. And ikigai is one word that describes having a purpose. Like that purpose can be waking up and, saying, today I'm going to smile at everybody I pass by, or today I'm going to, build a bicycle. Whatever that purpose is, it's essential for each and every person to have a purpose. So Interface's purpose is tied to this collection. So it was only natural to look to Japan for the aesthetics for embodied beauty. And, it's almost like asking your master, I have this brief to create carbon negative. What do I do? And master says, you look to Japan. So we looked at a lot of the craft that Japan, used in what was kind of founded on the principles of wabi-sabi. So wabi-sabi means embracing the imperfect. So Japan is one of the cultures that we think of that is completely connected to nature. It's they're very much bound by zero waste, and they take things that at the end of their initial life, they give it a new life by, like in sashiko, is taking textiles and renewing them by stitching a little pattern on top of the old cloth. And when they do this, they give it a whole new life, a whole new aesthetic. And this is a really hot technique that they're using. The young fashion designers in Japan are using right now. And then in ceramics, they have this technique called raku that they developed. And raku, most people you're familiar with it, but it is a glazing that when you put the pot into the fire, it intentionally cracks. Well, this was discovered kind of accidentally. And when they expected these perfect pots to come out of the kiln, but they had cracks in it, they decided, instead of throwing it away and starting all over again, to embrace it. And they enhanced the cracking instead. And raku literally translates to mean freedom. And yes, and so we have a pattern that's in the carbon negative that's inspired by this raku. We have this called Tokyo texture, and we have a pattern that's a carbon neutral pattern that's in embodied beauty that's inspired by the stitching called sashiko stitch. And there's also a pattern in the carbon negative construction that's inspired by the sashiko stitch as well, called shishu stitch. So, the idea of using techniques that are repairing things and rendering them sometimes more beautiful than they were before, it really does. I think it's a metaphor for what we're doing in addressing carbon in the world, addressing being responsible for our carbon footprint, and as well as the responsibility of measuring embodied carbon in the materials that we produce for commercial interiors. It's repairing the world in a way.
I love that, repairing the world. And this Japanese influence, Kari, is almost embodied in almost this juxtaposition of opposites, right? What's ancient and what's modern, what is imperfect and what's beautiful. I think about bonsai, what's small, but we think of could be so large. And when you were talking about with the cracked pots, you know, kind of accidentally on purpose, right?
Yeah.
And it is in bringing that to your work and to your craft. And I go back to what you were saying about you took this geographical leap of faith, leaving New York and coming to Interface, and then comparably Interface took a leap of faith as well with Embodied Beauty. You mentioned that not all of the assets that are normally there when a product is being launched for manufacturing. I would love for you to talk a bit about how work in sustainability and maintaining carbon negativity, carbon neutrality, how is that a leap of faith in the world that we're in now, and the work that you're doing and the work that Interface is doing, right? Your quote up there was about a revolution, and truly a revolutionary company, you know, in the corporate world. I'd love for you to, I just gave you a whole lot right there, but whatever you want to grab.
Yeah, well, you know, I think that in so many ways, it's easy to make beautiful spaces. And we have so many options. And, you know, and we have so many portals and where to go to get inspiration to make beautiful spaces. But it's not easy to make those beautiful spaces with heart, you know, with love of the earth, with a love for humankind, you know, so that a space is actually beneficial to the human experience and beneficial to Mother Earth. And so the leap of faith is actually in trying to do better, trying to dig harder, trying to find the object that is not only beautiful, but is responsible. And in doing so, you're actually respecting each other. You're respecting the person that's going to be in the space. You're respecting your coworker. You're respecting the company that you work for and what you represent. So at the end of the day, by the tail end of your career, you can sit pretty. You can sit up and say, I'm really proud of the work I've done. And actually, you know, like getting back into just like thinking about careers, I started saying at the very beginning of my career, I almost don't care who I work for. I mean, I do because I want to work for a company that I respect. I want to work for a boss I respect. But whatever I do, at the end of it, I just want to be proud of the body of work I do. Whatever is behind me, I just want to be proud of it, and you know, give, you know, like make my boss look good. That's you know, give people a sense of pride in what I've done for them as well. You know, I think that if you approach your career almost with a sense of selflessness, you will be rich, not monetarily, but in spirit and in pride.
Yeah. When the team at Interface, when Embodied Beauty has come through the process, and it's taken to market and designers are specifying it, how do you want the Interface team to talk about Embodied Beauty? What are the attributes, right? So you can talk about it as a designer, but from a super practical standpoint, how do you want the salespeople to talk about Embodied Beauty, and what is it that you want designers and then their clients, the end users, to know about this product, other than the fact that it's beautiful?
Oh, well, thank you. I really want people, when they see it together, working in a system, they'll just go, wow, there is so much texture, from the flattest texture to the plushest texture, and then it all works together. They enhance each other. And I think that, again, as humans, we respond to things when they connect us. We connect with it emotionally as well as tactily and through our senses, through texture, through color, sight. And I really want people to think of this collection as being imperfectly perfect, actually. Not to sound corny, but they're like with one product, the plushest product that is in the collection is called Geisha Gather. It was inspired by the kimono. A kimono is super, super straight. It's intended to be super straight. And then you have an obi sash in the back that gives it its form, its relief. And so Geisha Gather is inspired by that. And instead of putting the pattern into the tile, we actually use the tile to create the pattern. So when you put the tiles across the floor in various ways, that's what's creating the pattern. And it's in a way, it's in the imperfect perfect. Yeah. And
it seems perfect for this time we're living in now.
Yeah, and that goes back to the whole word reku. Freedom. This is the time we've the fashion houses as well as industrial design, as well as even just journalism, have taken a step back to pare down and to put forward what is the essential. And as product designers, those essential things are tactile, touch,
right,
sense, like emotional connectivity to something, playfulness, I think is important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And as well as longevity. You want things to be classic enough sometimes that they endure time and not be too trendy. So yeah, you just want to move on to the next thing right away.
So your point about timelessness and what endures is really relevant. Yesterday, the group broke up we had breakout sessions, and this notion that particularly in the US, we don't build to last, we don't build for forever, we build for now. What are some of the things that you would encourage and advise designers to think about, particularly from a product standpoint, as we move into a post-pandemic society? What is going to be important for designers to know about what's going to be appreciated by your clients? And you just talked about one thing, I think, tactility. What is sensual is probably going to be very important, even though we're focused on what's clean and hygienic. From a product designer's viewpoint, what are some of the conversations you're having about how we're going to think about the places we inhabit in a post-pandemic society?
Yeah, in the places that we inhabit in a post-pandemic society, that's interesting. So I think that what is important are a lot of the principles that were already embodied, like in the US Green Building Council and things like that. Light, the air, the senses, having, most important is having a reference to nature in your peripheral vision, or something that's really kind of alludes to nature but isn't exactly nature. Those things are really, really important in calming us down. Another thing that's really important in the built environment, ambient noise. We have to reduce the ambient noise in the built environment so that we can focus, we can hear our own thoughts. Ambient noise is a real stress factor that people don't even understand how much it impacts their day. By the end of the day, they're kind of exhausted by, like hard surfaces, too many hard surfaces in the built environment can contribute to too much ambient noise. and exhaustion and lack of focus. So,
Kari, what are you optimistic about right now with regard to your work as a designer? What are you optimistic about with interface and interface initiatives? I'd love for you to share with our audience, because there's an inner joy that you carry, and I would carry, no pun intended. There is an inner joy that you carry that I'd love for you to share some of that optimism from a business standpoint, from a personal standpoint, with our audience.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That is, that inner joy is actually something that all of us should try to connect with, our inner joy, right? And, being in a company that has a purpose beyond just selling products, it has a lot to do with it. And, and interface that off many, decades, over 25 years ago, initiated by Ray Anderson to climb Mount Sustainability. And getting the right people on the bus that have the same paradigm, surrounding yourself with the people that are going to enable you to reach those goals is of the utmost importance. And interface, has a culture of not just achieving the goal, but going beyond, which bringing carbon down is going beyond that goal. And so, working for a company that is so high-minded and aspirational is a thrill, it's a privilege. But I think more so, if I'm not working at interface, no matter where I'm working, having that sense of joy is really important, as it should be for all of us. Again, how do you find that? And I think that, again, it's being true to what is your principle, being true to as a product designer, being responsible for those products that you put out into the world as if they're your children. You're going to raise them, you're going to create them, you're going to give birth to them, you're going to put it out there in the world, whether it's a product or an interior design. And you want to make sure that they function well in the world, that they're going to be good citizens, and then they'll come home and have a restful place, when they're done. But I think that, New York City, living in New York City, and then working in Georgia has provided me with an incredibly interesting paradigm. It's two completely different worlds. And finding the commonality between these two different worlds has been really interesting. But it also has helped you pare down to what is essential in making a product, in connecting to the customer, in connecting to Mother Nature, and in connecting to yourself. I'm imagining that most of the people that are listening to us right now have this conversation are early in their career. They have a lot of opportunities. Maybe right now during COVID, it seems to be small, but it is going to boom. I'm certain that their lives are going to be rich and full of creativity and opportunities to make an impact on someone else's life through their work. Just stay true to what's important. Oh, I lost audio. Huh. I wish I could read lips. Has anyone else lost audio?
Yeah, I think we've
there we
lost
go.
Cheryl's audio for a second, so
I got it.
will work with her to...
I can hear Lauren or whoever that was.
Yeah, I think it's just Cheryl, so let me
Helen, I guess,
on that.
Oops. Can you guys hear me now?
Oh, yes.
You guys hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Can
You can hear me?
us?
I can hear you.
Perfect.
All right. I'm not sure what happened there.
Yeah.
I had a really good question and then I panicked and lost my question, Kari. Hey, I want to ask you a super personal question if you don't mind.
Sure.
All right. Your life has revolved around art and design, and you happen to be a part of a family that is part of design history.
Yeah.
Can you share for our audience, as much or as little, whatever you're comfortable with, but how that has been such an influence for you?
Oh, huge. Yes. So, you know, actually, I grew up in this industry at the same time as I grew up in the Pei family. They happened at the same time. I moved to New York. I met my husband right away. And so for the last 30 years, I have been able to share this experience with my husband's family, which is basically my family. As I mentioned, I grew up in Nebraska. My personal family is all over the country, but nobody's in New York. And, you know, when you're a single person in New York and you're dating somebody seriously, you absorb everything about their family, especially if they're New Yorkers. So that's the way it's been. My father-in-law is I.M. Pei, and my husband's an architect. He worked for his father for 17 years. My brother-in-law is an architect. He worked for his father for 21 years. And together, those two men started Pei Partnership Architecture. So I'm not just the wife of an architect, but I'm also the boss's wife and the daughter of an architect and the sister-in-law of an architect. And so design, and then this is a very close-knit family.
Yeah.
So we eat dinner together twice, 3 times a week, definitely at least once a week. And those conversations are always about design and always about architecture, but then also about other things that are going on in the world. So having this like family life that is about design has been, you know, become part of my DNA. But what was more important was that when Interface called and my husband said, you've got to take this job because it's, you know, a culmination of your entire career. He knew what he was talking about. He knew, you know, a lot of couples, they don't know much about what each other does in the day, in their careers or in their daily life. But my husband did because of this dialogue that we had been having for decades. That also meant that I was going to be removing myself from that dynamic. And so for the past 5 years, I would rush home to have those dinners, to have those conversations until last year when my father-in-law died. Then, you know, it was, you know, challenging. It was challenging to be away when the family needed me most. But that was at the same time when Interface said they wanted to do carbon negative. So I knew that I couldn't go back because I had to be a part of this revolution. I had to be a part of doing something that was so inherently integrated into making the world a better place in my industry and making spaces more beneficial for humans. And, you know, that is, it sounds corny. I think that story is a little bit corny, but it's my story. You know, having this family has been a gift because it's taken me around the world, and the experiences in seeing things, being places, meeting people is exceptional, just exceptional. It's been a journey. But yeah, pairing that with my Interface experience, I am the luckiest person in the world.
Oh, I love that you said that. I love that you said that. I love that you kind of publicly say that. I think sometimes we feel that, but we often don't kind of put that out there. And I love that you said that. I mean, clearly the family that is yours, that you're a part of, has had just unparalleled impact on the built environment. But as you were saying earlier about this connection to the things that we create, and you put it out there in the world, but it doesn't just exist in a vacuum. Your father-in-law's work has impacted millions. The work that your husband has done, the work that you've done, because, right, design is about what happens on the receiving end. And I think remembering or being mindful of the impact that design and designers have on the world. And so going back to interface, and you mentioned, I mean, Ray Anderson was so conscious of not just environmental impact, but also the personal impact that everything that interface created, the impact that that would have on individuals. What advice would you give to these young designers about being mindful of their impact, but also mindful of the companies that they work with, the design firms, the manufacturers that they work with, and that impact?
Well, for one, have respect. You know, I think that in today's day and age, because technology is so accessible, information is so accessible because of the internet, we all think that we're actually smarter than we are. And I think that experience is huge, and have respect for those who have experience. I've always latched on to people that are older than me, that are more experienced than me, because I learn from them. And then I also feel like it's really important to be, at the same time, be humble, keep your ego out of it, but on the other hand, be prideful. And in that strange combination, find somebody who you are afraid of disappointing in a way. Find somebody whose impression matters to you, that you can show your work to and say, you know, I'm proud of this, but is this good enough? And so that you're constantly striving, you're constantly challenging yourself to do better. Even almost have a mantra every single morning and say, today I'm going to do better than I did yesterday. And whatever it is, whatever project you're working on, whomever you're working with, be respectful and then strive for excellence.
Love that. I love that. What are you working on now? Anything you can talk about?
Oh, I'm super excited because, during quarantine, it's been really challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it actually meant like almost doing 3 people's jobs simultaneously from the confines of your home, just because of the nature that we work in a creative environment. We're collaborating all the time, but you can't do that so easily and so you end up doing more from A to Z than you otherwise would have. But the next collection is inspired by our beautiful little COVID virus. Yeah.
Inspired by the virus, literally the shape of it, or what we're going through. Okay,
yes, what we're going through.
Funny. Okay, it's funny because I've seen some things where people are literally using the shape of that virus to inspire look and feel. But
that's not
so. Okay, good. Okay, so not that literal, not that literal, but inspired by this moment of what we're feeling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the connectivity that we've had to each other, like the new communities that have developed, like people got to know their neighbors for the first time.
Right, yeah.
People who were confined to their buildings, if they're an apartment building or their homes, but they still found a way to get out and connect through their fire escapes or their front porches. And so it was the connectivity, and then it's also the connectivity to nature, because so many became gardeners for the first time. So, people started growing their own food, you know, and
yeah.
yeah, so it's about connectivity. So
That's
it's
perfect. I love that.
yeah, and so do I. So it's an easy, you know, transition from ikigai to connectivity to
And that's, I was going to
and also
quickly,
carbon negative is in that.
and carbon, there you go. That's, I was,
It's the
I was
it's
going to tie
carbon
that to that.
negative 2.0. So we've become more expert at creating these constructions. So we're able to go from there and see what else we can do to make it an even richer product, a more tactile product, a more textural product. It's exciting. Yeah.
So pushing better, pushing to be better, pushing to connect. Have you learned, what have you learned? I'm curious. Have you learned or acquired a new skill during this period?
Yes, actually, it's very mathematical.
Oh.
Yes. It's patience as well. Patience. Yeah, that's I was usually that person that was, you know, the New York minute was a half a second to me. But yeah, I've become more patient. That's definitely something. So, but I guess that's more of a characteristic than skill.
Sure.
But I have become more interested in math and using math in creating constructions.
Oh, that's great. That's fascinating. Can't wait to hear more about that.
A little bit retro. It's kind of the way I started out, because way back when Jane Barnes, I was working for Jane. Jane was really into math too.
Yeah.
You know, I loved working with Jane. I have to say, I loved working everywhere I worked. All my bosses have always been great. I'm super lucky with that. And they became my friends when I moved on. So that's another great lesson: is do not burn your bridges.
Right.
Keep those people that, you know, put their faith in you in your life to some extent. It doesn't have to be every day, but just so that you can say thanks.
Well, that is, Kari, that is perfect. And we started out talking about your personal and professional and purpose and process and kind of the symmetry of your life, and your joy is appreciated, your passion is appreciated. So the joyful and lucky Kari Pei, thank you. Don't go away, because we want to open up. Do we have any questions from the audience? And I'm Tech Team IIDA. Are we bringing folks on screen for any questions for Kari?
For this one, I think we just have one question from Alvin. Before settling on the Japanese inspiration for the initial carbon negative brief, what was the creative process like to get there with your team?
Well, that's a great question. It was really interesting, because as I mentioned, we didn't have a construction, we didn't have a yarn system, we didn't have a machine, but we just had a goal. And Hell or High Water interface was going to reach that goal, and that was their purpose. So in order to create something without any tools, you have to borrow things, basically. So we knew the machine was coming, so we borrowed our machine manufacturer's sample machine. We borrowed the yarns from our yarn supplier. They went ahead, we asked them to develop some prototypes for us. And then we took the prototypes to our machine manufacturer, and we started working on constructions in another state, in another place, in another facility. And huge shout out to them and thank them for giving us that time, that leap of faith that we weren't going to break their machine. and then that's the face part. That's the only portion of the metric that goes into making carbon negative. The other portion of the metric is in the backing. The backing is key. It's most essential in making this a carbon negative product. So that was going on with our scientists and our manufacturing facility down here in southern Georgia, in what we call RCA, but that's in West Point, Georgia. so we have these two different entities that are working simultaneously but completely apart from each other in little silos in order to bring this together. So it took a lot of communication, and that communication was through our sustainability team and the scientists that work on our sustainability team that had to come up with the metric in order to achieve carbon negativity. And so what carbon negativity means is not negative. I mean, it's actually a positive, because it means that the amount of energy that goes into creating this product is less than the amount of carbon that the product embodies. And so the carbon's not released into the atmosphere, it's actually somewhat absorbed through the manufacturing process and reduction. The yarns are completely new yarns, as I mentioned before, and they're really, really fine, because when we were making this construction, the restriction of the face weight was defined the denier of the yarn. And so we took, you know, some of the yarns that we knew were proven sellers, and then we analyzed those yarns to see what was essential in the coloring of those ends in order to achieve a yarn that would simulate something close. So we started with what we knew. We knew these were good sellers. We knew that they had, you know, certain characteristics that would give us contrast and texture. And then we knew the restrictions of the machine. So we worked with those machine restrictions in order to create something that defined and defied what was the limitations. Like, we tried to defy those limitations and challenge the machine and challenge the yarn in order to come up with a product. But one of the most important things about the product in the end is that it performs for the customers in the space, that it lays flat, that it has texture, that it has pattern, that it is not just like the most basic minimal construction that you put on the floor, but there's actually something that adds value to the space. And so we do that through color, we do that through pattern, and then put it together with the carbon neutral products, and it gives a broad dialogue to the whole floor.
Perfect. Kari, thank you so much. I think you've given us our mantra. You were talking about process, but the phrase that you used was defy limitations. And I think that is a wonderful call to action for all of us in design. It's a wonderful call to action for the world. Thank you for who you are and what you do. Thank you to the audience. Let's all defy limitations. Thank you, Kari Pei.
Thank you.
And yeah, love chatting with you.